Welcome to this session entitled Grand Strategy for a Hotter Earth. My name is Christina Mani, and I'm a professor of international relations in the politics department at Oberlin College. Patrick Doherty began his career in international security affairs as a researcher for the Harvard Negotiation Project and worked for over a decade in the Middle East, Africa, the Balkans, and the Caucasus at the intersection of conflict and development. He has been a senior editor of TomPaine.com and director of communications at the Center for National Policy. Later, he was deputy director at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C., where he met Mark Mickleby, and they began refining the idea of a sustainable grand strategy for the United States, which is today's topic. Together with Mark and with Joel McCower, they have co-authored a book hot off the presses this year entitled The New Grand Strategy. I believe you can pick up some copies here. Certainly can order it online. It has some quite innovative ideas. The subtitle is Restoring America's Prosperity, Security, and Sustainability in the 21st Century, so quite a heady agenda. In this book, they frame sustainability as a necessary and even primary obligation of an effective national strategic vision for the United States. That idea is by any measure of past practices a revolutionary one, but as they lay it out in the book, it is doable with the right inputs from business and local level public institutions. And finally, our commentator is Michael Northrup, Program Director for the Sustainable Development Grant-Making Program at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, where he focuses on climate change and energy. For over a decade, Michael has been a lecturer at Yale University's Forestry and Environmental Studies School, teaching on environmental policy campaigns. Before coming to the fund, he worked in investment banking and later served as executive director of Ashoka, the International Development Organization. Northrop serves on numerous advisory boards, including New York City Sustainability and Waterfront Advisory Boards and the Rainforest Action Network. So let's get down to exploring the Grand Strategic Plan.
I'm standing between you guys and drinks, so I apologize for that. The topic is grand strategy in a warming climate. What is grand strategy? It's the alignment of the nation's economic engine, governing institutions, and foreign policy to meet a great global challenge. Grand strategy is a thing we used in the Cold War and World War II before that. The story that I want to tell starts in Chairman Mullen's office in the summer of 2009. Mike Mullen was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was appointed by President George W. Bush. His term continued under the new President Obama. After 2 years under President Bush, he realized he was never going to get the level of strategic guidance he needed to do his job. And then after 6 months working for President Obama, did not feel that he was going to get the level of strategic guidance he needed. He felt that the President had a plan for triage, but not for long-term strategy. And for a $500 billion organization annual budget, you really ought to have some type of long-term plan. And he was seeing all of America's numbers going in the wrong direction, domestic and global. And was especially concerned about climate change and the rise and reemergence of Asia into the global economy. So, as a good staff officer, he said, I better be ready for when my commander-in-chief comes calling. And he pulled together a small team that included my partner, Mark Mickleby, who was a Marine Colonel at the time, and a Navy Captain, Wayne Porter. Puck cannot be here today because of climate change. Hurricane Matthew is churning up the coast, and he lives in Beaufort, South Carolina, which is now slated for 9 to 11 feet of storm surge. That small team of Navy Captain Wayne Porter and Mark Mickleby was assigned by Admiral Mullen to look at the question of grand strategy. Is it time for a new grand strategy, and what should it be? 2 months later, they had a narrative. The first thing they wrote was a narrative, not a strategy. They said America needs a new narrative. And the narrative called for a national strategy in which sustainability would be the centerpiece of our new grand strategic era. So what does that mean? Grand strategy in practice has been the alignment of these three things: economy, governance, foreign policy. When we did it in World War II, we set a pattern for doing grand strategy that I think is still relevant for today. In World War II, we set out the pattern. We relied on our economic engine to do the strategic heavy lifting. Before we could engage the Axis powers, we had to build up a military force. We had 450,000 men under arms, 1939, 1940. By the end of World War II, we would have 16 million That mobilization did not start when Congress declared war. It started fully a year and a half before that, when FDR and some industry leaders declared war. But it was our economic engine that was rewired and created a new industrial ecosystem, and we found new ways of financing that industrial ecosystem. It's a great pattern that we looked at. We also reorganized our governing institutions. We created a war cabinet, and we created the Joint Chiefs of Staff to manage the war effort. We had a two-front war plan. We had a very different foreign policy than essentially isolationism. We transformed every level of that equation because we had a new great global challenge. In Cold War, we did the same thing. A very different challenge. Instead of fighting a hot war, this time we had to fight a Cold War. But our economic engine, once again, was tasked with doing the heavy lifting. We're going to defeat the Soviet Union not in a contest of armies, but in a contest of economic and political systems. And to do that, we had to outperform and outlast the Soviet Union. And then we juiced it with a lot of intentional public policy. We transformed our governing institutions. The 1947 National Security Act created the Department of Defense, the CIA, National Security Council, NSA, a whole bunch of institutions. And then we transformed Congress to oversee these new institutions. We think it's time to do the same thing. What we said was, well, let's see if anybody else is interested in this. So after Admiral Mullen retired, I was able to hire Colonel Mickleby at the New America Foundation, where I was at the time. I had just gotten permission by my bosses to launch a program on grand strategy. And at the time, I was the only person really in the civilian side working on grand strategy in Washington. Good thing was we had aligned sustainability being the core strategic imperative. But we said, let's get a white paper to the next president. Whoever the next president in 2012 was going to be, whether that was President Romney or President Obama. Thank God it was President Obama. But it was right after Hurricane Sandy, right facing the fiscal cliff. And we got our ideas in when the president called for big ideas. By December, I was in the National Security Council staff briefing the team, looking at big ideas. Feedback we got very concisely from the president was, meets our ambition, exceeds our expectations. We were looking for big ideas, but we were looking for big ideas in silos. We were looking for big ideas like immigration reform, gun control, mapping the brain. These were the big ideas that they were looking for. Discrete silos with discrete constituencies and some type of political calculation for how they might make progress. They weren't looking for a new theory of the case. They didn't think that climate change required a level of systemic reintegration that I think this conversation has established. But they said, this is great. Could you do three things? Could you go to 2.0? Could you go deeper and go broader? Could you figure out an implementation plan? How does America do grand strategy in the 21st century? And then third, could you figure out the political calculus? How do we create political space in which an administration, potentially with some support in Congress, could actually get something done? We realized to do that we needed a new shop, and we set up the Strategic Innovation Lab just down the street at Case Western Reserve University. So we set out to do that, and this is 2.0, which is exciting. But when we were running this set of ideas past some stakeholders, we talked to a guy named Chad Holliday, who some of you may remember from his time as chairman of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who just recently became chairman of Shell, first American chairman of Shell. He said, look, love the strategy. Love where you're going with getting hydrocarbons out of combustion. Love all this stuff. That's where we're going with Shell. But if we couldn't pass cap and trade with control of both houses of Congress and the White House, there's no way we're going to do something this big, and we need to do something this big. Can you figure out how to make progress on this without waiting on Washington? And so that became our challenge. The story of our genesis. What are we thinking about grand strategy? What is that challenge as we see it? Because we see it as a little bit bigger, unfortunately, than just climate change. The problems that we see are four. One, obviously, climate change plus destruction of natural capital and ecosystem services. Right? We're a 1.5, 350 parts per million shop. We got to withdraw carbon, and we got to get out of combustion as an end use for fossil fuels as soon as possible. But that's not the only challenge. One is the reemergence of Asia into the global economy. Reemergence because 300 years ago, they were the big dogs in the global economy, and we were nothing. And they've got a long memory. They're reemerging after a very interesting 300 years. Ultimately, it's 3 billion people coming into the global middle class in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Over the last 20 years, we brought 1 billion people in. And if you think we kind of tanked the system trying to bring 1 billion people in, imagine what it's going to be like if we try to bring 3 billion under status quo. It's not going to be possible, we know that. Our current macroeconomic condition is one we describe as a contained depression. What happened in 2008 was a depression scale event that was contained by extraordinary action on the part of Congress and the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world. But it is not resolved. The underlying drivers of that depression, the absence of aggregate demand in the economy, is still alive and well. Those problems are not resolved, they've just been contained. And that containment field is still operating after 3 rounds of quantitative easing and extraordinary monetary accommodation on the part of the Federal Reserve and central banks. It's pretty bad. And we're looking at a lot of potential shocks coming at us, and we've got very little policy left to work with. Last, the resilience deficit. Our systems, our infrastructure, our supply chains are fragile, brittle, prone to shock, disruption, capture, and pointed at the economy of the 20th century. 4 big things. Environment, rapid, unmanaged economic inclusion should be a good thing. It's not when it's this unmanaged. Contained depression and a resilience deficit. If you're the President of the United States, you can't make decisions about climate in the absence of thinking about those other 3 things. That's fundamentally what we need to think about. If Hillary Clinton is going to if she gets elected and convenes what the platform says she's going to convene, which is in the first 100 days of her administration, a national climate change summit, if we're not talking about those other dimensions of it, we're not talking about a real solution for climate change. The solution will not be sustainable. It won't work. We judge that problem set to not only be interconnected, but also to require a grand strategy. We need a new economic engine. What's exciting, though, is that the way economic engines are structured or just conceived of, the way we look at history, there's great opportunity. Great opportunity that is actually aligned with that problem set, which is very historically convenient because we'd be really screwed otherwise. How we design the last economic engine that gives us the opportunity for the future. To find how the 3 terms that you have to kind of get in right relationship for a grand strategy, it's a simple formula. Demand plus capital minus stranded assets. What's the demand? What's the call on goods and services in your economy? Capital, how are you financing that call on goods and services? And then stranded assets. What are those things that had value in the past, in the last economy, that for political reasons need to continue to have at least some residual value? Demand. In the Cold War, what was the demand for? Well, instead of war material, which was the World War II economic engine, right? We demobilized the economy. Well, we didn't really. We just remobilized it in a different direction. We aimed it at some underlying secular trends. There's a massive shortage in housing in the United States. And if we didn't manufacture demand for suburban housing, it would have been satisfied by building European-style cities. We leveraged that underlying demand for housing to create suburbs. And that suburban space and that design is at the heart of our sustainability. Demand for consumer goods. We had 16 years of austerity under depression and war, and there was a lot of pocket change in American households from not being able to spend money over the last 4 years of full employment. And so we unleashed consumerism in the United States. And then reconstruction materials for Europe and Japan. A story that was critical to creating allies, critical to our strategy in the Cold War, but as a pool of demand dropped off relatively rapidly in the mid to late 50s and was never replaced. That creates an interesting pattern for the future. So where's the demand, where's the capital, where are the stranded assets, and is there an industrial ecosystem that can handle it? We think the story is actually pretty bright. So there's 3 big pools of demand for walkable communities, for regenerative agriculture, and for resource productivity. Walkable communities. The National Association of Realtors is pretty much saying that boomers and millennials have had it with suburbs. 60% of Americans today do not aspire to another layer of suburban sprawl. They would prefer walkable, service-rich, transit-oriented communities. Boomers, because on average they've saved $45,000 a piece for retirement. They can't retire, they have to keep working, and if they're going to keep working, they have to be in a smaller home, a smaller lot, closer to transportation, to job opportunities. Millennials, They grew up in the isolated suburbs in the 80s and 90s. They never want to go back. They suck. They don't even want to own a car. They don't aspire to be soccer moms and waste all their time commuting. That plus a good, healthy portion of us and some others, I'm Gen X, you get 60% of Americans wanting that. That's 3 times the demand for housing after World War II. On a proportional basis, it's 8 times in the aggregate. Regenerative agriculture, we need to increase global food supply, 60 to 70% by 2050, and 100% of that has to be regenerative, rebuilding our soils, cleaning up our waterways, fixing our nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. That's a huge, tall order. It's a really great story for the American farmer, who's going to have to transform how they grow America and the world's food at a time of high and rising prices, and while changing the methods that create as good yields or better with significantly diminished input costs. And then third, global demand for resource productivity. If we've got 3 billion people coming into the global middle class in the next 20, 30, 40 years, they need all the stuff of a global middle class lifestyle within planetary boundaries. A big part of that is moving countryside and into the cities. How are those cities? What's that new housing system like? It's going to absorb a lot of material. We need a new material stock. We can't build it out of the old material stock. Out of concrete, they're 5% of all carbon emissions globally. We need to innovate the hell out of that. All the other attributes of a global middle class lifestyle are going to be delivered at dramatically reduced levels of energy and material intensity. Great opportunity for innovation, and that's America's specialty. So the extent that we can keep the trend going with advanced manufacturing and innovation, we're going to be able to be on the cutting edge of that. Put them all together, you've got knowledge economy, meeting the demand for goods and services. You've got the rural community floated by transforming our agricultural system. And you've got a hell of a lot of construction jobs creating a new American dream. One that's transit-oriented, dramatically reduced footprint. We think there's a great good news story here. That's the demand side. Capital. We're living in a period of what economists call a savings glut. There's about $11 trillion sitting in assets that return 0 or negative interest rates. The entire Japanese yield curve, out beyond 10 years, is negative. That means they're paying people to hold their money. Institutional investors need higher levels of return. Everybody is underperforming. They need a new investment hypothesis in America and in the world. We need to invest that money fast. And folks with the Focusing Capital in the Long-Term movement have been doing, that money is getting organized and it's getting angry. And then stranded assets. A stranded asset story that's going to be absolutely critical to get our hands on, which is the labor stranded asset. But there's another piece that happens every time we do an economic shift. Right? You have to figure out how do you redeploy labor productively and justly. There's another new wrinkle this time, and it's going to be the oil and gas that we cannot burn. We see the current fight between folks who care about climate change and oil and gas companies who want to pursue their historic business model of focused on combustion as a choice that may not be necessary. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. What if we moved oil and gas out of combustion and into materials? Not consumer materials. We don't want it to end up in the Pacific Gyre or into my wife's bloodstream. She's had her estrogen cycle disrupted by cheap plastics. But what about putting it into the built environment? Right now, there's some incredible work done on non-toxic plastics that are the only thing that at least us and some friends at MIT see as being able to replace concrete, steel, aluminum, and lumber that we can't use anymore if we're going to stay within what our friend from the Carbon Tracker is telling us is our carbon budget, embodied energy in the built environment. We see this really interesting alignment of demand, capital, and some great stranded asset solutions, including labor and building materials. You got a great opportunity. What's your theory of change? I want to simplify theories of change into 2. So Michael, do you want to talk about those 2 theories of change? One is, are you pushing Washington or are you pulling it? Pushing Washington, absolutely necessary. Pulling Washington, also going to be absolutely necessary. We're going to have to push Washington hard. Do we go all in on price and carbon? Or do we all go all in on Bill McKibben's and Mark Jacobson's solution, where we start building out the solar and wind industry of the future on the federal dollar? That's going to be a lot of dialogue. With all that pushing, we still may not win. So how do we diversify our portfolio and think about how we pull? Also in the book, we came up with an idea around a new industrial ecosystem and the financing tool that can pull that new industrial ecosystem into existence. Powered from those three big pools of demand while absorbing this savings glut, putting capital back to work, putting people back to work, building a new economic engine on a fundamentally more sustainable footing while driving our macro climate metrics in the right direction, I think potentially faster than if it's just a zero-sum fight to the death with people marching in the streets.
What is the point of view on all of this from the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation?
I had a thought as I was sitting here that maybe what I could say is talk a little bit about New York City, because I think it's an example of where we need to go, and New York is actually taking steps that actually sound a lot like what you say we all need to do. New York, about 8 years ago, started working on a climate plan under Mayor Bloomberg, and it continues to this day under Bill de Blasio, the current mayor. And this city has recently committed to an 80% emissions reduction, which is what scientists say is the minimum that we need to do in all of our jurisdictions and in our industries, et cetera. 70+% of our emissions come from buildings, and we have 1 million buildings. And we aren't just going to build new buildings that are great. We've got to retrofit old buildings. So how do you do that? I mean, this challenge is true all across America and most of the world, except for maybe China, where they're growing new buildings at such a furious pace. We've done a bunch of work on this, and we calculate that if we put a point of sale requirement that all buildings need to be retrofitted, and we back it up with building codes that are advanced, that get us to a net zero building code, meaning essentially carbon neutral by 2030, that if we implemented that, we would generate about $6 billion a year in investment. We generate almost 100,000 new jobs every year. We generate about $500 million in tax revenue that could be used to reformat our very old infrastructure and public housing system. We would save tens of billions of dollars between now and 2050 in energy savings. And we would bring our buildings to essentially carbon neutral. Do the climate math.
Is it possible to do that in New York?
Buildings, if you just let buildings go between now and 2050, 90% of the space will turn over in that time if the past is a rule for the future. So it's all going to turn over.
You mean sells? It transfers
when it sells, or when people decide to make big renovation decisions. So you capture that too. So it's a totally doable thing.
Can you take a 100-year-old building and make it a net zero building?
Yeah,
Definitely. And you'll save money over time.
and it may be easier to do it on a 100-year-old building
Yeah.
than a 50 or 40-year-old building.
This is a huge solution, and we're right on the cusp of it. We have a working group of 10 American cities all working with New York and a couple of organizations about how to do this in those cities too. We have about 50 jurisdictions in the U.S. that have said they want to go to net zero energy buildings in their communities, both new and old. So, I mean, that's one of the big things that we're going to do. And as we do it, we're going to generate a new economy at the same time, and we're going to put a huge amount of money to work with real returns. We're also going to change our energy infrastructure so that it's all renewable. The city's committed to going 100% renewable in city operations, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to put about 2 gigawatts of solar on rooftops, and in whatever open space we can find. We have about 6 or 7 gigawatts of peak demand, so that's a ton. And we're going to build offshore wind off the coast of New York City and off Long Island. And we're going to create a massive new industry in New York Harbor that's going to be assembling turbines and servicing turbine farms, wind farms offshore. And there's been a bunch of news about offshore wind recently. Massachusetts just committed to a more than 2 gigawatt wind farm off the state. Rhode Island has just completed a small wind farm. There's another one in Long Island that's just being permitted. So this whole offshore wind thing is going to be a huge industry for the United States going forward. We're also going to change our vehicles, and we're going to amp up our mass transit. We're going to make all those investments and we're going to put what vehicles do operate in the city are going to be electric. So we're going to move those off the electricity grid also. And it isn't just going to be New York City.
I'd like to request that when you do your list of offshore wind, you include Cleveland.
Yes.
Small but mighty. The elements of the grand strategy that you laid out, is there any part of the economy it wouldn't touch?
No. And my sense is that it would have a propagating reach out. Is it policy-led or is it business-led? If it's business-led, then it's going to evolve a little bit more organically. The starting point is really going to be around tapping into demand for walkable communities, bringing large-scale transit infrastructure programs back to American cities and creating the places where walkability can happen. That's going to be a lifestyle shift for a lot of people. It's going to be people moving from an average of a 2,400 square foot home to an average of something smaller, but that's the demographic trend. So everything that touches the home and consumer trends, which is 70% of the economy, is going to be affected, and then you're going to have a significant industrial increase as a result. The trick is dealing with industrial energy and embodied energy in all the stuff that we're going to be making. There's a great opportunity for American innovation to really focus, not just innovation in the next generation of an iPhone, but we need strategic innovation. In the material sector, that's really going to be critical. How do we harness renewable energy? And Sandia National Labs is doing some really interesting work on creating industrial heat out of concentrated solar power, so that you can have industrial processes not powered by hydrocarbon fuels. You're still going to need those high temperature processes, but can we do it from renewable energies?
Melt iron with the sun?
Yes. So they're getting about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit out in Sandia's desert, concentrated solar power. We are actually looking at a possibility that in order to build a sustainable future, we're going to have to use oil and gas to build it. And that is not our main narrative right now. Keep it in the ground is our main narrative. But as we start to go beyond the conversation about how we create and generate electricity and move our cars, we're going to have to start talking about how we build our buildings and how we build those vehicles. From what I'm told from my friends in our polymer department and at MIT, we don't have an alternative stock of materials that's accessible enough to be able to produce the urban environment. Say to China. China's moving 290 million people into the urban environment in the next 20 years. They've poured, I think Bill Gates tweeted a few months ago, a crazy stat. China's poured in the last 3 years as much concrete as America poured in the 20th century.
Oh my God.
They're building 360 full subway and transit systems in China. Today, we've got 25 on the waiting list that the federal government can't fund. It's a whole nother order of magnitude. And so the material economy we're thinking about here, but Bill Ford at Ford Motor Company, the reason he's moving to mobility strategy, essentially selling mobility services, is because most of their sales are overseas. And in a highly crowded international city, you can only sell so many cars. It's just like, the analogy is like giving everybody their own elevator car in a building. If you're in a dense urban environment, you don't give everybody a personal vehicle. And so Ford is saying, look, predominantly we're going to have our major commutes, major transportation routes covered by rail, and then individual passenger vehicles and autonomous, however they're driven, will be just providing that final mile service. So it's a massive, massive challenge when you look beyond just converting the American energy system and looking at the full requirements of building the future.
I'm from West Virginia, so I don't really need a mic probably, because we holler down home. I came up here to holler because one of the things that we haven't talked about are the people and the land of West Virginia and Kentucky that are in desperate condition right now due to the bankruptcy of the coal industry and the lack of anything but that mono economy. So what is your commitment to the people in land of Appalachia, bringing them along as they created the Industrial Revolution in this country. What's their future going to be now that coal is gone for?
Sure.
Yeah, this is the justice that Bill Ritter mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. I live in Cleveland. My wife's family's from Bluefield, West Virginia, down in McDowell County, West Virginia. When I first went there for a family funeral, I said, wow, this is worse than where I served and lived in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, except it has really great highways. What I'm kind of viscerally aware of as we think about the long span of the American experiment is that the American people have migrated for economic reasons for our entire history. When I think about the opportunities in Appalachia, I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities around agriculture, around wind and other renewables, around water resources, around ecosystem services especially. If we're going to make our accounts balanced, we're going to have to bring ecosystem services into the full national accounts. And so I think that's going to really help bringing tourism back to these wild and wonderful places that are connected by train. Renewable energy creates more jobs than coal. So West Virginia has already figured out how to do gravity storage. If anybody knows this case, there's a great, very large pool that powers one of the coal-fired power plants and reduces the amount that you have to burn. They experimented with this 40 years ago. It works. I think we have to get the larger American economy moving on that trajectory for it to work out, but given our energy requirements and given our agricultural requirements, I'm seeing a lot of opportunity for Appalachia.
It seems to me also that when there are jobs, people move to where the jobs are. And it's hard to pick up and leave, but people with the fracking boom, people did it all over the country. So there's no reason why they wouldn't do it for a renewable energy boom.
Yeah.
Why do these ideas resonate so much with the national security crowd?
Part of it is it's how they train and how they fight. They have to be able to sustain themselves in battle. And so sustainability is not this greeny concept. And actually, Puck and Wayne didn't know sustainability was an emotionally charged word in the ideology of America. It has a rationale that makes good sense to them. If you're going to fight and die for your country, you really want it to be for a good reason. And right now, the reasons aren't very good, and we've got a very high suicide rate in the services, and because we're killing people for no good reason. And that's really hard on a social creature to be able to do that. And then especially to come back into a civilian place where you haven't been respected in your relationship to your family. Nobody understands the stresses. That service and understanding other cultures and the situation of what's going on in the world, because you may have to fight there or you just fought there. You don't have the luxury of ideology to ignore science. What service is right on the forefront of climate change and sea level rise, but it's the Navy. And they've been the most progressive because they're going to have to move their bases. And they're going to have to respond to all the conflicts that are going to arise from those littoral cities collapsing because of some type of devastating climate-related disaster. Understanding what reality is keeps you alive. That's why sustainability is got to be the core centerpiece of any strategic plan going forward.
The DNA for a successful future outcome is in place, and we're going to have to weave it all together to turn it into an ecosystem that works. We all get scared about the climate change problem, and we should be scared about it. There's so much going on that's positive. If we left it to federal governments, as many of us have said, I don't think we'd get there, but there's so much going on that's coming up that's driving the system forward. So I can't help but be a little bit optimistic about what our opportunities are.
Thank you and good evening, and welcome to this exciting conversation as part of the conference entitled After Fossil Fuels, the Next Economy. Tom Steyer is a business and financial leader, a philanthropist, and an environmentalist. After founding and running a successful hedge fund in California, he left to work on nonprofit and advocacy efforts. He now serves as president of Next Gen Climate, an organization he founded in 2013 to prevent climate disaster and promote prosperity for all Americans. He also serves as co-chair for Save Lives California, the Coalition to Prevent Teen Smoking and Fund Cancer Research. With his wife, Kat Taylor, Tom Steyer has pledged to contribute most of their wealth to charitable causes during their lifetimes. They founded Beneficial Stake Bank in Oakland, a nonprofit community bank that provides loans to people and small businesses shut out by traditional banking system. He was born in Manhattan. He is a summa cum laude graduate of Yale University with majors in economics and political science. He received his MBA from Stanford Business School and has served on that university's board of trustees.
The next economy, the fossil-free economy, but let's be clear, we are in a race with Mother Nature over climate change, and it's a race that we can't afford to lose. We have the tools to win. The question is, do we have the will to win? Mind that the solutions to climate change are within reach. We have the tools we need to move America forward. Or, the US has moved farther and faster since 2012 than anyone expected. We have been running hard. The cost curves of clean energy versus fossil fuels are crossing. Business attitudes have changed. Public opinion has moved. And we've made enormous strides from a policy perspective. For much of the United States, wind energy creates the cheapest source of electricity, with solar energy not far behind. The US installed more wind energy in the fourth quarter of 2015 than in all of 2014. In 2015, solar added jobs 12 times faster than the overall economy. We aren't asking if anymore. We will fuel a strong economy by creating a healthy environment. And the businesses in America have taken note. There's a false belief that American businesses don't support action on climate change. But by and large, we found the opposite to be true. The majority of American businesses know we can no longer afford not to act, and they see a huge opportunity in transitioning to clean energy. Last year, 154 major American corporations signed on to support action on climate change in advance of the Paris Agreement, Future. The 6 largest banking institutions in the US also called for a strong agreement in Paris, with policies that account for the full cost of carbon. Businesses in Ohio and across the Midwest are leading the way on climate and clean energy. Cargill, Schneider Electric, Johnson Controls, there's a long list of major American companies that are not on the coast. Meanwhile, historically conservative icons have moved. Our military leaders are sending a clear message to our politicians that climate change has huge implications for national security, threatening to create huge numbers of climate refugees and to destabilize the world. Religious leaders like Pope Francis are making a powerful moral case for protecting our common home and looking after our fellow humans. And we can't forget that a majority of Americans want their leaders to take action on climate change and want to accelerate our transition to clean energy. A recent poll of Republican voters and conservative independents here in Ohio found overwhelming support for clean energy, with 72% wanting their candidates to support energy efficiency and clean energy policies. Young people, a critical group in 2016, overwhelmingly want our leaders to go big on climate and clean energy, with 80% preferring candidates who offer clean energy solutions. In fact, our polling internally has 91% of millennials, of people under 35, wanting to transition to 100% clean energy, and 81% of millennials saying that clean air and water is a high priority to them. That's why our organization, Next Gen Climate, launched one of the biggest youth voter programs in electoral history this year, operating on almost 400 campuses, including 50 right here in Ohio. In 2016, we think these efforts are more important than ever. It is increasingly obvious that climate change is the challenge of our generation. And we are doing significantly better than anyone predicted 4 years ago in combating it. But as I said to begin with, it's a race. And Mother Nature follows the laws of physics. 2015 was the hottest year ever by the biggest margin ever. August 2016 was the 16th straight month of record-breaking heat, the hottest month recorded of that month for the 16th time in a row. For the 8th consecutive year, extreme weather has cost US taxpayers over $10 billion. I think the easiest way to think about how nature's moving is to know that people look at 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, as catastrophic. We've moved 1 degree in 215 years. Last year, we moved 12 hundredths of a degree. This year, we look to be moving about 14 or 15 hundredths of a degree. So over 214 years, we moved 1 degree. In the last 2 years, we moved 1/4 of a degree. We're getting hotter much faster. Mother Nature isn't waiting around. From a practical standpoint, these accelerated impacts are forcing us to examine our timelines and ask, are we doing enough quickly enough? And perhaps more importantly, are we electing leaders who are prepared to take swift and decisive action to avert the worst impacts of climate change? To his credit, President Obama views clean energy as a legacy issue. He was a global leader in the Paris Agreement, and he's continued that global leadership in advance of the Montreal Protocol meetings taking place in Rwanda this coming week. He's made historic agreements with India and China. He rejected the Keystone XL pipeline. He extended the tax credits for wind and solar. It's a long list. Even as the Supreme Court has stalled in implementation, he deserves an enormous amount of credit for championing the Clean Power Plan. But even as the president leads on climate from the White House, the gridlock of entrenched interests in Congress has frozen much of our progress at the national level. And the political landscape in 2017 has the potential to be even bleaker. On climate and clean energy, government sets the framework, and the private sector uses that framework to do what it does best, which is to innovate, to create, and to drive global progress. It has never been more critical that we get the framework right. You have seen this story play out here in Ohio. In 2008, your state passed an achievable renewable portfolio standard, an energy efficiency resource standard, and amazing things happened. Between 2009 and 2013, Ohio attracted $1.3 billion in private renewable energy investment. And while Ohio saw approximately $750 million in wind and solar investment in 2012, the landscape changed dramatically when the legislature passed a bill freezing those standards in 2014. Following the freeze, solar investment in Ohio dropped below $25 million in 2015, and wind development dropped to 0. The framework really matters. And on a national scale, the framework that we choose in 2017 and on will have implications for generations to come. The 2016 election isn't just about the old battles between the right and the left. Those battles, however loud and passionate and hard-fought, habitually led to elegant and practical solutions. We are not a quiet people, but we do face up to our problems together and solve them. That's what Americans have done for over 200 years. That's who Americans are. But in 2016, we're in a battle for the future. The decisions we make today will affect generations for 50, 100, and more years. And the refusal to face up to the challenge of our times is flat out wrong. It's a morally and intellectually bankrupt position. Our task can be summarized very simply. It's to clean up electricity generation, it's to electrify everything, and it's to increase our energy efficiency dramatically. If we do that in a way that creates good-paying jobs throughout our communities and cleans our air and water, we will be successful. Embedded in the word progressive is the idea of looking to the future, to moving our country forward, with progress. The urgency of this crisis cannot be overstated, but neither can America's capabilities. We never shirk the big questions. We never sacrifice the interests of our neighbors for the sake of our personal gain. We do face up to the world's greatest challenges. We do come together to solve them. The stakes are extremely high. But we will rise to the occasion. As the President said, we will live lives of meaning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And now to introduce our next amazing speaker is Professor A.G. Miller, Professor in the Department of Religious Studies at Oberlin College.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. Reverend Moss serves as the senior pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ on the south side of Chicago. Reverend Moss is no stranger to Northeast Ohio. As he was raised in the Cleveland area, he graduated from Shaker Heights High School. He is a Morehouse man, graduate of Morehouse College in 1992, as did his father before him. He completed his Master of Divinity degree at Yale University, at Yale Divinity School in 1995, and earned a Doctor of Divinity in 2012 from the Chicago Theological Seminary. He has served as senior pastor of 2 historic black churches. Reverend Moss was raised, trained, and has served in the best of the progressive black church tradition. His father, Reverend Otis Moss Jr., served with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Board. He follows the footsteps of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the former pastor of Barack and Michelle Obama, and one of America's greatest preachers and social activists. With the Nation of Islam and with teachers from Oglesby Elementary School and others to stop the violence that has devastated the Chicago community. Dr. Moss understands that this violence can strike at anyone, as he outlined in a very powerful letter to his teenage son recently that was published in the Huffington Post, warning and educating him about the responsibilities in the world. Reverend Moss understands the link between urban poverty, environmental racism, climate change, and the environmental crisis that we all face.
There is great excitement across the nation about a nexus, a movement that is happening. A movement that is connecting environmentalism, mass incarceration, and a just economy. I like to call it by any means necessary. It's what we need to do. And the faith community specifically has been a community that is deeply connected to the environment. I know in recent years it seems that the faith community has moved in a different direction, but the roots, whether you're talking about the Abrahamic religions or Eastern traditions or the traditional religions of the global South, that all of these traditions believe in the sacredness of this planet, the sacredness of nature, and the sacredness of human beings. And out of the African American tradition, I like to say that we have always been green. I've been deeply connected to green. From 1619 to 1831, that was the green church movement in the African American community. It was actually the red, black, and green movement. Red for the blood, sweat, and tears, and black coming out of the Africanity and African religious ethos of the African tradition, and also green, recognizing the sacredness of God's planet. And why do I say that was the green period? Because that was what was known as the invisible institution. We didn't have very many church buildings. The one building that we had was the building that we could step outside and see. That's why we sit down by the riverside. That's why we talked about wade in the water. That's the recognition of the sacredness of that which God has placed in human hands. And even when you built a church, you used reclaimed wood. Many times it was liberated wood from somebody else who thought they were your owner. But you had reclaimed wood. It was an early form of the recycling movement. And so many of the earlier churches in the South, especially if you're looking at a first African or a second African, these were churches that were designed with African ingenuity. Without an AC system, they could design churches in such a way that it would heat and cool depending upon the seasons. And these are things that we have to reclaim, especially in this day and age, and build this wonderful movement of moving together with environmentalism, mass incarceration, and just economy. And some are raising the questions like, I don't understand. How do you connect these three things? One, recognizing that the earth is sacred. Two, recognizing the human dignity of all, and that moral language that comes out of the faith community of redemption and grace, giving someone mercy, or as Brian Stevenson says, just mercy. Or even moving further, when you talk about just economy, making sure that there is moral language and a morality connected to our market. Also, ethics with our economy. How do you move these things together? Well, we figured out an idea at Trinity United Church of Christ. We desperately wanted to renovate our facility, but we wanted our architecture to connect with our theology, our prophetic theology of the belief in human dignity, and that what we do should also impact the immediate community. That not just to renovate a building and have a nice building, but have a building that speaks to what we believe in. So we marched on this idea of doing a green renovation. We're going to be LEED certified. There I was at the barbershop. I overheard the barber say that there was an elderly gentleman who was from your church who was recently in here and said he's upset with that young preacher who wants to put a putting green on top of the church. So I had to do some more work and did a listening campaign and a vision casting campaign of sharing what would be the benefits if we reduce our carbon footprint. But we do not stop there. We made the decision that people working on this renovation would be returning citizens. Who are returning citizens? Some people mistakenly call them ex-cons, felons. No. You are just a returning citizen, so your rights are restored, so you can have your full dignity. So now you have the environmentalist movement also reducing mass incarceration. 60 million people are in some way or form or shape under the criminal justice system in America. We had moved from 150,000 in the 70s until we planted a war on poor people, a war on drugs under the Nixon administration. And now there are 2 million people. But there is a way for us to reduce this by recognizing the sacredness of the planet and the sacredness of human dignity. And by doing this, we are trying to structure not just the ministry that we are involved in, but also the building that we occupy that speaks to the theology that we believe in. Mass incarceration, environmentalism, and just economy. The just economy comes in because we had zip codes that we wanted to make sure that we hit. So we weren't just going to bring in people to the south side to do work and go home. We want to make sure that the dollars that we spend with the subcontractors, they are also in the local neighborhood. Because one of the greatest ways to reduce violence is with a job. And if you ensure that someone has a job, and the greatest way to reduce crime is not casting it as a criminal justice issue, but as a public health issue and as an economic issue, and ensure that people have home ownership. Home ownership and jobs are the greatest way to reinvigorate a community. So moving these three things together, recognizing the history that we come from that has already been green. Even our grandmothers were green. Before we even knew what green was. Grandmothers knew how to make things called quilts. That's nothing but recycling. Our grandmothers knew how to make things like gumbo. That's recycling once again. Things that you were going to throw away, but put it all into a pot, mix it up, and now they serve it $20 a bowl at some restaurants. All of this is green. And the idea that if you are ill for food security, you do not go to the supermarket. You already have a garden in the back of your house. All of these are part of the green movement. And putting these things together, environmentalism, mass incarceration, and just economy. This is how we design a new America, by ensuring those who have been marginalized are a part of the economy, and making sure that we take care of the planet, the only planet that we have. Thank you.
Tom, let me start with you. What does the next-gen economy do for the job creation in this area of the country, in the Rust Belt, and particularly in the older manufacturing cities of Ohio?
Let me go back to our mission statement, which is to act politically to prevent climate disaster and to promote prosperity for every American. If we don't go after clean energy in a way that creates jobs, we will not succeed. Ohio has 100,000 clean energy jobs. About 80,000 of them are in energy efficiency. We're going to have to make this transition. And the question is, are we going to have those jobs be distributed throughout poor communities? If we're not, it's not going to succeed. When I originally got involved politically on clean energy was in 2010 in California. And one of the people I was working closely with was a guy named Kevin DeLeon, who represents one of the poorest districts in Los Angeles, California. And he came and said, Tom, if you put solar panels on the houses in my district, the houses will fall down. But if we don't get a bunch of those jobs putting solar panels up around the state, I'm not going to support you. And we, from the very beginning, have said the jobs have got to be well paid, they've got to be well distributed. We have to make sure that people who need jobs, that this is an answer for the injustice that we're seeing in our state and around the United States, economically and racially. So when you ask how is it going to work in Ohio, it is only going to work if we create these jobs and distribute them fairly and pay them fairly. And if we do that, we will have people who will fight for a new economy desperately. And they will be the answer for the clean economy, will be the answer for justice economically, and the group of people who will fight together will be much more than 50% of America.
Reverend Moss, how do you see the clean energy economy succeeding for people in the south side of Chicago? What's actually happening there and what needs to happen?
Faith and Place, about 126 congregations throughout the Chicagoland area, part of the coalition that they're doing and doing a tremendous. Another project that we are currently working on is with a group out of New York entitled Block Energy. Block Energy is attempting to go to faith communities and to do retrofit. Because what we want to do is to leverage the city of Chicago to do retrofitting off of every public building. So we're trying to do it as coming together as faith communities, utilizing the same local returning citizen format, and then presenting to the city of Chicago to say that we did this as a faith community. Do you have enough faith in your community to do what we have done? Another that's happening is in and around food security. There are there's 1,026 empty lots in Inglewood that has the highest level of violence. One of the projects is to reclaim these spaces for community gardens. Community gardens have shown to reduce violence. People come together and they build community. People get nosy with each other. What are you doing by my tomatoes? End up creating a type of community watch centered around tomatoes and greens. Simple little things as this. But then you're also dealing with the food insecurity issues and the food deserts and food swamps. Children then begin to eat food that is healthy. When they eat food that's healthy, they no longer are bouncing off the walls from the high sugar content that they are normally eating, which then causes many teachers who are already overburdened to say, I'm sending you to the office or somewhere else, or for a doctor to make a recommendation that's misdiagnosed as someone who may be ADHD. So putting together a coalition of people who will do retrofitting and utilize alternative fuel sources are some of the things that we're working on in Chicago.
What is the role of anchor institutions like an Oberlin College in leading efforts to mitigate climate change in ways that will benefit everyone?
When you think about climate and energy, it's really important that the thought leaders, the people who set the intellectual framework for how we think, actually do lead. The greatest change that we had intellectually was when we decided that government was something imposed on us that we should get rid of. That somehow we were going to move back to the market, that was the source of not only efficiency, but justice. Ronald Reagan said, the scariest words in the English language are, we're from the government and we're here to help. And everyone believed that.